The period between 1914 and 1918 saw a great war happening in the fields of Europe. The battles are known and often represented with soldiers in monuments around our country, but what was happening at home? With Fighting from Home, we're commissioning a series of 6 artworks on the Mill Pond Meadows Nature Reserve, which represent all of the different things that happen to the real people in Featherstone. We've discovered so many different parts of Featherstone's rich history, and this documentary shows what we're going to do with that research. At its heart, what we're doing with public artwork is to create identity, pride and empowerment. If you represent people from the past, if you represent a part of a community, you give it that empowerment. In Featherstone, what we've got is a huge history of non-combatants and combatants in the First World War, but those people that you don't see, the non-combatants, they are such a big part of our town there. And so what we're going to do by representing them is show a light on what happened so that we can give a richer context to the history of Featherstone.
I think one of the main things with public art, especially for young people, is it gives them knowledge. It also gives them that sort of inspiration to perhaps do things that they wouldn't do. The sort of public art we have here in Featherstone is all about the history of the town. And it's the history that we need to get over to young people. This is what happened in the past, and fetch them on and perhaps see what their forebears did and what people have done in the town, and what the living was like in the past in the town.
So when we looked at the corner, we thought that this one, it spoilt the whole ambience of the place really. So that's when we started trying to get some funding together to make an entrance. Of course, we needed you people like yourself to come and tell us what. I mean, we're not artists, but we needed someone to come and show us what we're doing. I can't wait now. Instead of having this interview, I wish we were putting them up. I think when we interviewed Luke, he came across us from the same culture as ourselves, basically working class. And we don't want anything fancy and arty-farty, if you want to use them words. But I thought Luke came across as a real genuine chap. We've worked with him very, very closely, and hopefully when we're finished, we'll have something that we're both really happy with. Oh, I know we will anyway.
In 2008, my wife, which is Karen Williamson, she decided to get a Mill Pond Meadow group together, Friends of Mill Pond Meadow, and we started to raise funds because of the different biodiversity of the whole area, and made pathways, seats and access for disabled people, everybody really, so that it'd be a comfortable and nice relaxing place to come.
I think the useful message that you can take forward from towns like this is that they knew about cohesion. We talk a lot about community cohesion these days, but they were doing it 100 years ago, out of necessity.
As with almost every town in the UK, Featherstone in the Great War saw a lot of men go off to fight. But the majority of the people that lived there still contributed hugely to the war effort. And that happened in ways that are just not represented now. But if you look at the history, it's all over. So what I did was I went back in time to the Featherstone Chronicle, which was the newspaper of the day, and saw everything happen. And going through that chronologically, what we saw was, in colour order, you've got changing roles of women, you've got loss, there's different things that are happening in the perspective of what's happening from home, there's the changing roles of people, and of course the coal mine. But what changed during the war was, in this colour system going through the newspapers, was how you moved through to everything being about the home life, or what happened is huge amounts of Belgian refugees and the importance of the community within Featherstone supporting the Belgian Refugee Fund. That happened a lot here, and then June 1917 kicks in, and you've got a lot of red, which is the loss that comes from the Battle of the Somme and areas like that. When I started to look at it, you see that there's about 6 main areas that need to be targeted to show and represent exactly what was happening in Featherstone.
I think the subject matter of this particular piece of artwork is really, I feel it's like a trigger, and each part of the sculpture You can look at it individually or collectively, and it's going to trigger something different in each person's mind. It's going to set up loads and loads of questions. Initially, what does that signify? How do I feel about that? How does it fit in with the town? How does it fit in with the meadow and the warhorse and the trees? And it's the questions it will raise in all age groups. And I'm particularly fond of the fact that it'll raise questions in the little kids' minds.
The way that the sculptures will be made is in the same way as Warhorse, so it'll have this kind of wireframe look that you can see through, but at the same time it'll be a figurative piece of a human, so it does look different, but they will be of the same language. And as well as that, they're raised up on these stilt legs so that there's visibility beneath them, so that you can see the rest of the Mill Pond Meadows, but they get the height that you need to be able to see them from the road and from all around the site. So they're part of the Warhorse family, but at the same time they're independent pieces, and that's how it'll work as a sculpture. So for our artwork in Featherstone, what I'll be doing is using steel bar, either this sort of thickness to that thickness for facial expressions and body shape, and then that kind of thickness there, the support for the bodies, and bending them using the furnace over there, hammers and anvils, to create the shapes of the 6 sculptures that are going to be in Mill Pond over in Featherstone with you. The 6 designs that we've come up with are all really drawn from what was going on at the time, particularly with the individuals that we're looking at. So we're looking at children, for example, how they were affected. They were often affected by the loss of a parent and the change in their society. There was a lot of poverty, but they contributed hugely. They did plays, they gave their Christmas presents, they raised money through community events and sent them out on things called the Overseas Fund, which was a way that they gave Christmas presents to soldiers. They would often make big sacrifices themselves to do that. So this is represented by this young boy here. He's holding the Overseas Fund letter, and he's got his father's Tommy helmet, and he does look thinner and perhaps as though he's suffered loss, which is quite a regular thing that would have happened. That's a representation of children in that regard. Moving here to the Refugee Fund and the Belgian refugees, that was such a big part of what was going on at the time. The miners were giving large portions of their wage. At the very beginning in 1914, when Belgium was invaded, they were inviting lots of the Belgian refugees over. As well as that, they gave what was at the time the smallpox hospital to the Belgian refugees, who were very grateful. They spent a lot of time planting that area. They learned English. They started working in the coal mines, and it was embraced as part of what we need to do as a society to look after the people who we were fighting for.
The sculpture of the refugee is so relevant today as it was then. The refugee nowadays is no different to the refugee from the First World War who was escaping that death and destruction, and that's where humanity has to be when we see these people.
A lot of the women from Featherstone would have got on a shower bank and gone to the munitions factories over towards Leeds. In particular, Barnbow, which was the biggest filling station in the UK, filling literally large shells that would go over to the Western Front and be used in trench warfare. And that was a horrible job. It was toxic. Their skin turned yellow. They were called the Barnbow Canaries. Their babies were even born yellow. And this was a huge and very dangerous role for women, and they stepped up to it with a sort of what seems like a great deal of optimism.
Women needed to step into roles that the men traditionally had. I mean, the woman was traditionally the wife, the mother, stay at home, do the cooking, cleaning, look after the children. But when you don't have the men there to do the other jobs, the women had to step up, and I think the women do step up because they have that ability to do that. And I think it's very important that we recognise that in society now as in society then.
So it always was a very matriarchal society. Out of necessity, I think, because in these new coal mining towns it was rough. and the women had to be just equally as tough as the blokes who lived here.
I've lived in Featherstone all my life. Went to school at Featherstone and stopped in Featherstone. Will not move anywhere else than in Featherstone. I started working in the pit bottom at the time when I was 15, and then worked my way through to working on the coal face. On the coal face at times was very dangerous, same as it was in the trenches, because you used to get roof falls nearly every other day. So it was more or less as dangerous as ever on the coal face, because that roof can come in any time. So the only thing you get there is a body bag. That's all you get, because you're dead. I think that the sculpture is a good idea of a miner. We need a miner because we're a mining town.
Obviously you can't represent Featherstone without looking at the coal mine, and the coal mining is such a big part of who you are in Featherstone. But on top of that, it's not just pick or shovel down in the ground.
What you've got to first think about when you're dealing with non-combatants in the First World War from here is that a lot of coal mining would be a reserved occupation, so they would have stayed doing their work because the country needed coal for fuel to fight the war. My opinion is that the miners who didn't go to war and carried on working in other pit were just as brave.
The society that was built up about the coal mine, that was the support mechanism, is huge. Their coal mining unions of the time and their groups gave large amounts of money to the Belgian Relief Fund, to the Widows Fund, to the Orphans Fund, to the Soldiers' Families Relief Fund. And even though they couldn't afford a lifestyle themselves that was even near comfortable, they were giving and giving and giving. And so that's represented here by a coal miner on his way to work or on his way back, carrying the banner, which was the symbol of their mine at the Acton Hall branch and the other branches of Featherstone.
Every mine had a banner. Every mine had a banner. We needed a banner to show solidarity, because we marched behind the banner. We were proud to march behind that banner.
Moving over to the figure of the VAD nurse. So that is representative of women's changing roles again. And the women at that point wanted to do so much more, and they campaigned to be allowed to do more. It was then evident that they could do that in so many different ways, but a huge portion became voluntary aid detachment nurses, so VAD nurses, either at home or in a field hospital in France. So they would go as unqualified nurses and do all of the horrible jobs that needed doing, give care to people, and give sort of essentially end-of-life care to people, as well as emptying buckets and everything else that needed to support qualified nurses and doctors. And from there they often became fully qualified nurses. So that's something that was really a big thing during the war period and needs celebrating.
Normally the war is, especially the First World War, is represented by people fighting over in the trenches and the damage and the death that occurred there. And I think really what happened was a lot more happened at home as well. It was, I think you have to get a feel of what it did to affect people here as well, because yes, it was the fighting over in the trenches, it was the fighting over in France, and it was all that death and destruction, but there was a lot more went on. In any war, there's a lot more goes on behind the scenes.
And then lastly, you can't really talk about the home life of what was happening in the war without talking about loss. And so to represent that, we've got a sort of haggard figure which could have been at war. You're expecting that he was. He's also laying flowers in memory of the people that he may have lost. So the idea of loss is broad, because you don't just lose a body, you don't just lose your mental health, you can lose the way of life. And that's something that we really should remember, because it would prevent more wars if you realise the consequences of the past ones. And that really is what we're trying to do here, is to paint a picture of what life was like during the Great War, and in consequence of the Great War, because Featherstone has a very proud heritage of being a positive influence in trying to get through hard times.
This particular sculpture is what I consider to be the beginning of our artistic journey through our community. But the positioning of this, the size of this, and the subject matter of this, I think will make it the pinnacle.
A piece of sculpture like this becomes a focal point in a town that sometimes has lost its focus over the years. I think in times gone by, when everybody were working and everybody were socialising well, we had a lot of focus, and I think we had a lot to celebrate. So anything that allows us to celebrate where we're from, it's got to be a good thing.
Oh, I'm very excited about seeing the sculptures. It's that particular area. It started from so little, and now it's just becoming such a wonderful area to visit. And I think these sculptures will actually totally enhance the whole area and really draw people in. And the message is there, and we need to give that message to people. Not to forget how dreadful these events are. But to remember and to learn and to move forward and look at it and think, yes, let's not let it happen again, hopefully. But that's it.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
Okay,
That's perfect.
was that
Thank
good?
you.
Was that good?
Yeah.